Uh, well, I don't know if the people who are on today were on Part A or not, so we're going to do a recap of what we did with Part A, which we divided this into 2 segments only because we thought that it might be just a little bit too much for everyone to grab onto everything through one session. So what we're going to do now is do a quick follow-up on what we did, but at the same time, if you were not in on the first call, please feel free to ask us to stop or go back or go forward or whatever may help you understand where we're at. The 3 categories real are substrate adjustments, the NexPress support for those substrate adjustments, and then go into our Q&A. First thing that I'm going to talk about is the warning signs, things that you can be looking for on whether your temperatures just may not be right, whether they may be a little too low, maybe they're a little bit too high, whether they're really too low or really too high, or whether they're at this level where they're not really presenting you with any visible signs of problems, but still may not be ideal for the press, which may be contributing and assisting to some contamination issues and some extra work on your part to keep the whole fuser area where it needs to be. So we've got a couple of different things going on here. First would be really knowing that you may have a problem. And, you know, through your normal IQ diags, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, error codes that you may be getting or machine codes that you may be getting, or overall print quality issues that you may be getting on your sheet, things to be looking at, your paper handling, whether you're getting wrinkling or curling, or whether you're getting any kind of disruption or quality issue that you think could be related to the settings that we have for the substrate. One of the things that I like to tell people to do is to kind of take a step back for a second and take a good look at what's going on in your fuser area, how clean your fuser area is. How clean do you keep that, which is something that we can talk a little bit about, but I can't stress enough how important it is to keep that fuser roller clean and wiped down while it's hot and get that residual dry ink off of that roller before it has a chance to really bond with the roller and starts giving you a lot of gloss differential. The same thing with your donor roller. If you are running too hot on a lot of your substrates and you're doing that with quite often and your temperatures really be hot, you may be getting a lot of contamination. Some of the warning signs for that are looking at your fuser area, look at your fuser oil in your reservoir, and see what color it is. That's one area where we can start. If it is really dark purple, dark brown, dark red, dark anything, you are getting excessive contamination. We really want that fuser oil in that reservoir to be as gray, milky white as we can get it. There's always going to be a tint of color in there no matter what, but we really don't want that oil that's in there to look like motor oil. That's when we've got an issue. And that's some of the things that we want to address. We also want to look at your donor roller. Take a good look at your donor roller. Take a good look at your metering roller. If you're getting dry ink on your metering roller, you're getting dry ink on your donor roller, you're seeing a lot of excessive dry ink in that area, those are warning signs. Looking at your fuser cleaner web and taking a good look at that and seeing exactly how much of your dry ink is transferring to that roller itself. These are the kind of things to kind of take a look at. Same thing with then looking at your sheets themselves. Does it look like your sheets are getting an excessive amount of oil contamination on them? Are you seeing some lines in the clear areas of your sheet where you would just run one job at one size and now you're running it at another size and you see this faint hint of tinted oil on either side? Are you getting a lot of wrap-ups? An occasional wrap-up is going to happen. There's a lot of reasons for that, and Ricky and I can talk a little bit about that in a few minutes as far as what could be causing that. I don't I don't want to spend too much time on that, only because some of that may be another issue that we may need to talk about, but we will be able to answer questions on that. Basically, looking at now what I said as far as spending the time in the fuser. By looking at your fuser cleaner web, you can really determine an awful lot, as well as what I had just mentioned of those other things to look for. So let's go with the assumption right now that your fuser oil is a lot darker than it should be, and you are seeing some contamination within there. What I like to tell operators to do is to start with picking 2 or 3 of the stocks that you run the most. So if it happens to be that you're one of the unfortunate ones that's running nothing but 70-pound uncoated text, then we need to look at certain things specifically for that. If you're a shop that's running a little bit of uncoated, a little bit of coated kind of mixture, or if you're a shop that's running mostly coated, you're going to see less contamination with your coated sheets than you are with your uncoated sheets. You're going to see a little more there. So we have 2 types of contamination here. We've got our oil contamination, but we also have our dry ink contamination, both of which are making your life harder in keeping the press up, running smooth, keeping your quality up, and keeping your maintenance down. So that's something we want to kind of talk about. So going into a little bit of detail now about picking one of your sheets. So let's start with talking about your most popular sheet, the one you run more than anything. Everybody has a go-to sheet that they're running the most stuff on. So what I usually start with is at least 200 sheets. First thing, open up the fuser and advance that fuser cleaning web so that it's got a clean section of it. You can see in the 2 pictures there what I've done there. You want to then take a job that's moderately covered, good ink coverage, not just text, but you don't have to really throw it under the bus and give it solid ink coverage on both sides, but a good representation of the kind of work you're running, good medium coverage. And you want to go ahead and run 200 sheets just like that with your current settings. Start there. And then open it up and take a look at that fuser cleaner web and take a look at it. See how contaminated that is. You're going to see some contamination there. You're going to see some ink there. What we don't want is this big 2-inch band of black or purple. Then we know we're really getting a lot. If there's a little bit of color there, we're fine. We want to try to get to a point where we can minimize this. Now, to briefly talk between coated and uncoated, uncoated is a little trickier because you're going to find that we can make this adjustment that we're going to discuss and drop that temperature down a good bit on your uncoated stock without seeing a big dramatic difference on the web. But there is a difference. So, for example, if you are currently running at 158 degrees and through this testing we can get you down to 150 with the same substrate, getting good adhesion and getting good results, that's where we really would rather be, because by not running hotter and running at the ideal temperature for that stock on your press, everything kind of runs smoother. Less contamination, less problems. Everything will start to won't fight against you and will start to work with you. The coated sheet's a little easier to tackle because you will really visibly see a difference on that fuser cleaner web when you drop that temperature, and you will see that contamination almost go away. It's much easier to do on the coated than it is on the uncoated. However, the uncoated is where the majority of the problems are. So getting the temperatures down is important. So what we would do then is, once we've diagnosed this, so let's say you run this and you see, I've got a little bit of color there, we can make the determination that we're going to tweak this a little bit, or you could say, you know what, I don't think there's a lot of contamination there. I'm going to leave this one alone and move to the next one and move to one that I know may be a potential problem. If I advance the slide to 5 here, we're going to kind of see what we've got in here as far as what these indicators are that I've just described. starting to get into how we make this adjustment. As you go through this and look at the slide, I'm not going to go through this slide verbatim. I kind of want to say that we have, when we're talking about this kind of contamination, we've got a 330 rule. So what we're going to do is basically concentrate here when we're talking about hot offset contamination is we're going to talk a little bit about how we make that adjustment. So let's say that you've done this with the sheet, now we want to kind of make an adjustment. Although it takes a little bit longer to do it in these smaller increments, until you get really good at it, I would advise doing it in these smaller increments. So I would start with moving your temperature. So let's say we were at 158, dropping it down 3 degrees, go to 155, and then your energy flow would drop 30. So the 330 rule would come into play here. You run another 200 sheets, look at it again. At the 200 sheets that comes off, now what you want to do, take a look at those last couple of sheets that have come off, 197, 98, 99, and 200. Give it a good scratch test. Make sure that you're getting good adhesion. Look at the sheet. Move it around in the light. Look at the way that the way that it's fusing onto the sheet. Make sure that everything looks good. Make sure that the ink is not blistering, making sure that it's staying on the way it was. You've all been doing this long enough that those signs are things you should be able to quickly diagnose. So you've done that, and you dropped it to 3 degrees and 30, and you've come to the conclusion now that you can go further. So you drop it another 3 degrees and 30. And by doing that, now we run another 200 sheets. So yes, it's going to take you, realistically, this is something you want to do when you have the time to do it, not when you're pressured. And if you've got a couple of hours till you can do your top 2 or 3 sheets, that's what I would recommend starting with. Start with your top 2 or 3 sheets. So figure it's going to take you a good half an hour to really get, maybe even 40 minutes to get one where you want it to be. And as you get used to doing it, it may take you a little less time. And then there may be times when you can, make the diagnosis a little bit quicker. So, in theory, it's not out of the question that you could take some of these substrates down 8 to 10 degrees Celsius and get really good results, and you're running a lot cooler. So going to slide 6, I want to talk briefly about, this chart is important, and it's been out for a while, but this is a good baseline for your uncoated sheets as far as where that you can start as a baseline. A lot of these substrates that are in the system if you look at these numbers, they're hotter than this. This is a good starting point. I actually, in my testing, found that a lot of these can be brought down considerably. But it does depend on your machine and your fuser and the stocks that you are running. That's where I'm going to take just 2 minutes and say that it's really important that you don't qualify a sheet, set it up, get everything exactly to where it needs to be for a specific stock, and then just use another stock that's of the same weight and caliper and use that with those settings, because especially with uncoated sheets, because the characteristics of those sheets may not be the same and your results may not be the same. So you really don't want to get into the habit of having a generic script for your 70-pound uncoated and use that for your Lynx, your Finch, your Cougar, what Husky, whatever it is that you may be using, and since it's 70-pound offset, you're using that. I would like to try to deter you away from doing that and actually creating one specifically for the substrate that's in there so that you are really always using the same baseline and making sure that when you're tweaking that you're always sticking to those same parameters. So I like to say that this chart is a really good starting point, but you can come down from these numbers in a lot of cases. Me personally, for example, the 148 to 169 basis weight GSM, is at 158 degrees, and my house uncoated sheet for that weight, I'm at 147. So I've come down a good bit from that. And by doing that, I have really, through the sheets that I'm running, have minimized this contamination to a point that it really, really will, you will start to see a difference. It will take a little bit of time, but you will start to see a difference. And you will start to see where your whole system starts running better for you by doing this.
Mike, could I interject something here?
Yes,
second.
please.
So just want to point out that this table can be found on the miscellaneous tab on the NexPress homepage. So miscellaneous 317 has all this data. As you can see, this temperature column versus a nip-whip column has been modified, and the energy flow from your original substrate setting. For instance, that 70 GSM paper that's running at 143, the nip has been increased, so you maintain the same level of fusing. So at this point right here, we take an uncoated stock and we squeeze the image to push that toner down into the valley so we can fuse that sheet evenly. At the same time, your temperature has been reduced probably by 15 degrees or so you don't pull that toner from the surface of the sheet to contaminate the web, as Mike has been describing. So I just want to point out that these settings right here is probably directly proportional to the substrate setting that you have in your catalog, other than the fact we flipped the nip for the temperature so we don't hot offset as much. But as Mike has mentioned, even with these settings, you can still drive that temperature down following that 3-degree, 30-watt ratio in order to get your contamination even better. Okay, Mike, you can take over.
Yeah, I agree completely. I just went through, and specifically the 70, which you were just talking about, I'm actually much lower than the 143. Now that's not always going to work for everyone, and that's why these are kind of things that internally with your environment and your system and what everything that's going on in there, why some of these things you want to do for yourself and not rely or necessarily trust, what the set settings are. So something that we can definitely talk about in further. But that chart it really is good to start with. The wrinkling and curl, which is what this next slide is it's funny. I talk to a lot of people who tell me that this really isn't a problem anymore. I do not run into a lot of people that are telling me that wrinkling and curling is a big problem. There was a time, and Ricky, please, at any moment that you feel that what I'm saying is inaccurate, please jump right in. But I think that once the pressure roller was changed to the low strain pressure roller on a lot of the machines, that wrinkling stopped. And am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, for the most part, that's correct. The only time you could experience wrinkles now with the low strain pressure roller is if you're running images that have like a heavy coverage on one part of the sheet versus the other. Then you have a different speed where the high laydown of ink is. So for instance, if you have 2 bars on the outside edges of your sheet, and in the middle you got like light text, that edge is going to want to drive through at a faster speed because of that toner height, and then that could draw your paper in and create wrinkle conditions. And if you see that, as it states in the diagnostic, you can just reduce your nip in increments of 1,000 in order to balance that out. But as Mike stated, the low strain pressure roller was designed for wrinkles and slap up to reduce those issues. But depending upon your ink lay down and your coverage, you still can have differential drive where those heavy toner areas are on the sheet.
And me personally, in my workflow, although I do have jobs that are described the way you're describing them, Ricky, I have not, since that pressure roller has been introduced, I have not had sheets do that, even when they have that kind of coverage on one side or the other. So, but if you are having that, go through these procedures, and that will definitely that will definitely assist in that. These are things to consider when you're having other problems with your substrate. I'm trying to focus as much as I can today on the contamination side of the substrate settings, because I really do believe that a lot of your maintenance and a lot of the time you're spending working and cleaning the press and keeping your quality up, a lot of that can be reduced greatly by just getting your temperatures where they need to be, reducing your hot offset, and keeping your fuser area really clean. So my big goal all along has been to help operators really try to get the maximum quality out of their press on a regular basis with the minimal amount of hands-on maintenance. So I like to say that I do the things that make the press do the work for me. So I try to stick with going specifically in those areas. So that's why I was concentrating a little bit more and wanted to concentrate on really leaning towards you guys understanding the purpose of trying to reduce your hot offset and not going from one extreme to the other and entering into cold offset. So finding that happy medium will make your press much, much happier. Ricky, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next two, and so you can just briefly kind of refresh everybody on the diagnostics and things where they can navigate through NexPress and finding some of these things easily, so that if they really wanted to pursue some of this further outside of what we're doing, they can do that.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. The IQ diagnostics for the hot offset and the cold offset, as Mike has mentioned, is in-house in NexPress. You can get to it in one or two areas. If you go to the sensory codes, just like we show here on the screen capture, you can get to the first one in the list, and it's called dry ink contamination in the fuser. And once you go through those diagnostic steps, it'll walk you through it, primarily what Mike has already been talking about. And it'll also give you the ability to print a print right out of NexPress. You would take this print and you would compare the density of the print to the web density. And based upon the web density being higher than the print, you will make adjustments until you balance that out so that the web density becomes lighter than the print. Then that puts you into a safe zone so you don't have hot offset issues that will sit there in your cleaning web and rub against your fuser roll and create gloss artifacts. Next slide.
Thank you. 1 second.
Okay, here it is. Here you see the first item in that list. As I stated, it's called dry ink contamination in the fuser. And once you get into this diagnostics, there's a B-level procedure that pretty much brings you up to this table that's down in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. That's the same table that Mike showed you. It's a good starting point to start with uncoated substrate and with some matte coated substrates that gives you hot offset issues. As stated before, the temperature is reduced in this table and the nip is increased sometime by 3 millimeters. And when you increase the nip, if certain substrates, you can induce curl into the substrate. And this diagnostic will lead you into steps to tell you how to find that happy medium between curl, hot offset, things of that nature, so you can get the best quality out of the machine. There's also in that diagnostic, you'll see where it has you check your fuser fluid system, because you want to make sure you're getting the right amount of fluid that's laid down on the fuser roller, because the fluid is a lubricant between the toner and the roller to keep that ink from sticking. If you have a situation where your fluid level is low and you're not applying fluid on that fuser roller, then that ink is going to stick and you're going to get excessive ink that wouldn't necessarily occur. So you're going to want to make sure you got the right amount of fluid that's in the sump. A good thing to do there is, especially if you dump your your sump periodically because of contamination. You want to fill that back up to a level and then insert the sump into the machine, and then look at the back drain area and make sure that fluid is flowing out of the return, going back into the reservoir. And then once that fluid stops dripping, now you know that your level in that sump is correct. You also want to make sure that once you put the sump into the assembly, that the latch mechanism is latching the assembly. So you have the same engagement uniformly across the roller surface. So once you've ensured on a B-level standpoint that these things are done, you should have enough fuser fluid lubricating the roller to ensure that the ink contamination getting pulled from the sheet is not being caused by a lack of fluid. From an FE level perspective, there's a different level where he goes to, where he would calibrate your fuser roller to make sure your fuse is calibrated, and he would check things at a deeper level in order to make sure that your fusing is adequate. When these things are done, adjusting these settings that we're talking about here is going to work best for you. Is that the last slide? Okay. This right here is just another close-up. It talks about curl, and it shows that table again at a clear view so you can actually see it, but it's the same table. We can move on.
Okay, and I think
we're ready for, and this right here shows exactly what I mentioned before. There's a test target that it allows you to load into your job stream, and it prints this target over here on the image that's on the right, and then you can check that image for adhesion, and it gives you steps as you look above that image for hot offset to adjust the same steps that we've been talking about through this presentation.
Okay. Krista, I think we can probably open it up to some questions.
Yep, I'm going to open up the lines because I don't see anything in chat or Q&A, but again, I'll continue to monitor those if people want to type in questions as opposed to speak, but I'll open the lines right now.
All guests have been unmuted.
Okay, the lines are open, so feel free to ask Mike or Ricky any questions you have on substrate adjustment.
So I have a question to the audience. Have anyone been able to, practice these steps and had good success?
I'll answer yes.
Asheville.
Because the whole intent here is to practice with these techniques, get to a point where you can adjust your substrates, and then it definitely will reduce your downtime waiting on FEs to come out and make these adjustments that you can make on your own.
I see a question right here from Wes. Krista, do you want me to just go ahead and
yeah, he must have sent it to you privately because I'm not seeing it, so go right ahead. Yep.
Okay, all right. So Wes has asked us, do you have any suggestions for dimensional ink not sticking to uncoated sheets? So I'm gonna say something, and then I think that both Ricky and Len can probably contribute to this as well, because there may be more than one answer to this question. But even though the dimensional ink, the temperature will go up and it will be hotter for that sheet, it is entirely possible that you need to create a separate substrate where you actually go up with your temperature higher than you normally do for your CMYK work, and have that even higher than where it needs to be. And it sometimes may only need to be 4 or 5 degrees, but if you're talking about it cracking or flaking or not filling in, a lot of times that's what it is, and it is temperature related. But please, Ricky and Len both contribute.
Yes, I have some input on that one. So as Mike stated, when your job ticket sees that dimensional clear is used, there's an automatic 20-degree bump under the hood to try to help fuse this ink. Slows your press down to 83 pages per minute. You're running an extra 5 degrees because of that speed, 85. So once you add up the the temperatures, you can be running as hot as like plus 30 degrees ahead of what your substrate setting is selected to. But even in some cases, based upon the substrate and your percent of laydown that's coming from your job, it may not be enough, as Mike stated, in order to fuse this ink to the sheet. In some cases, you may have to raise that temperature slightly. We do have limitations, so there's a special need procedure, SP 246. This is under the miscellaneous category again, and it's recommended fusing best practices when running DMCL. Because we do that temperature bump under the hood, you don't want to go too high in the temperature, because if you do, you get to a point where you start getting temperature warnings, or you can even get in a situation where you may have hot offset because your temperatures are actually too high. We've had some occasions where customers had to go into their VTD gain values to reduce them slightly, because the ink laydown is just too high for us to fuse to the sheet. That's a procedure that you can follow through at Applet, where you reduce the VTD gain. When you reduce that value, is reduce the stack height in order that you may be able to fuse that image. One thing, there's another special need procedure, SP 243, which is set up for DMCL, and there's a target that we print, which is an orange target. It's a good target to load on your DFE, and if you have success printing that target, usually it points to something in the way that the job is set up coming from the pre-press that could be an issue. So it's always a it's good to start with that target if you're not fusing properly, just to isolate whether it could be your paper, your settings, or the laydown is coming from the pre-press, and then you decide which way you go to correct from there.
Yeah, I think this is Lynn, those are both great explanations, and I'd just add that one of the limitations that should be in the documentation is that we don't recommend more than 30% coverage of the dimensional clear ink on a page. And of course, that's also a function of where it's on the page, what concentration and so forth. So I think Ricky's point about running the sample that's kind of pre-tested, the orange, and if you're successful with that, you might check with the ink estimator and see how much dimensional is actually being laid down on the page.
I think that the other thing that where you really run into this being complicated is if you're trying to run a really heavy uncoated sheet. So let's just go right for like 130-pound uncoated cover, and then you've got this logo that's 100% of all four colors, let's say registration, so 100% CMYK, and then you're putting solid dimensional down over top of it. You're asking it to do an awful lot. And that is where you can start to run into problems there. So if you start thinking about how heavy your paper is, what's underneath the dimensional clear, how much CMYK is actually underneath the dimensional clear, and then how much dimensional clear is going down. But as a generic rule, I have found, for me in my shop, I have found that the amount that it's raising automatically on the heavier weight stocks is just not enough. So when I'm running 120-pound or 130-pound, whether it's coated or uncoated, I've actually increased my temperature 5 degrees hotter than where I normally keep that temperature, and then let the system do the rest. So what I do is create a separate substrate and put DIM after the name for dimensional, so that I have a separate one with the temperature just slightly hotter. I don't want to recommend that if Ricky and Len feel that that may not be a good rule of thumb across the board, but it doesn't hurt to test it. Where you run into a lot of problems with dimensional clear is if you're one of the shops that runs an awful lot of dimensional work. Dimensional can really be problematic when you're running really long runs. It's really kind of, in my personal opinion, designed more for shorter runs. You start running dimensional clear that has a lot of coverage on a heavyweight stock, and it's 4,000 or 5,000 sheets, and you really have to think about what you're doing there and pause and stop and do some cleanup during it, but that may be part of the flaking off. I hope we're answering your question, but if we didn't, please let us know.
Okay, guys, thank you for those. He'll try those suggestions. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so again, I'll post to the group. Feel free to type in a question that you have, or you can verbally speak now as everyone is off mute.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any additional questions. I don't know if Len or Ricky or Mike, if you have any closing comments.
I just like to encourage, the audience to, if they have not been using the suggestions that's in this presentation, to, start, because it's definitely be great for their business and decrease their downtime and then increase their fusel roller life if they can learn this art of adjusting those substrates to the point where they can reduce the hot offset contamination. Customers that I've worked with and going through this procedure, even Mike and others, have seen it to be beneficiary. So if they can start practicing this, becoming proficient, I think it's going to be best for them in the long run as far as their uptime is concerned.
I do have one last question. Is there a place where we can find the slideshow from this presentation? So yes, I will actually email it to everybody at the end of the session. What I'll do is we're recording the session, I convert that into a video file, and then I will email out to the full operator list the link of where this live session is, and I also take a PDF of the presentation that we're reviewing today and attach that to the same email. Any other questions from the audience? Okay. We'll end a few minutes early, but I want to thank everybody. And again, look for our email communication coming from me by the end of the day. Thanks so much. Thanks, Ricky. Thanks, Mike. And Len, thanks for participating in field questions.
Yep, anytime.
Okay,
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
We have one more question.
Oh, go ahead, yes.
Oh, yeah. Go.
Actually, has there been any improvement on running pre-printed stuff through the machine? Or are we still not suggested to do that?
Well, pre-printed materials is pretty much going to depend on the ink and the breakdown of the ink. At some inks, if the breakdown of the inks is at a lower temperature than where we fuse at, we will pull that ink from that page to the fusel roller. So it all depends, I guess, to say what type of inks, what temperatures do those ink break down at. As you know, our temperature range from like 150 up to like 170. So if those inks break down at temperature within those ranges, the chances are that ink is going to get pulled from that page once we reheat it, if your temperatures are not higher that fuse that ink on your pre-printed stocks. And when that happens, you can definitely damage your ORCs and reduce the life of your ORCs.
Okay, so essentially it's still kind of a case-by-case thing, and really and truthfully, we shouldn't try to run pre-printed offset through the machine?
Well, I guess our response to that is that, some inks they work, some inks they don't work, and if you want to try them, I guess the ORCs that get damaged would be at your cost.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a comment on it if you don't mind, since I am an operator myself. I'm going to be as honest and frank as I can about this situation, and that is that nothing good comes from you running pre-printed stuff through your press. As much as everybody wants to say that it could be okay and that some are okay and some are not okay, you have to do what you have to do for your business, but the truth is that you're causing yourself an awful lot of headaches internally with the machine because it's causing a tremendous amount of oil contamination throughout the system. causing you to have to spend a lot more time chasing your machine being up with good quality, because those shells are just a vehicle for transporting oil throughout the machine. If you are going to do it and have to do it, I really highly recommend, and I don't know if you've watched any of my videos or not, but I really highly recommend, depending on how long the run is, that you run a lot of clean sheets, blank sheets, coated, single-sided, nothing on them, intermittently throughout the job while you're running those, to try to clean as much oil off of the BCs as you can before it completely trashes the web, because that's what it's going to do, is it's going to trash the web, bounce it right back up to the BCs, overly contaminate the BCs, get out through the system and into the fuser. And I have found that by not running pre-printed shells through the NexPress, that I am much better at keeping the press under control and always staying ahead of the quality issues, so that I'm not chasing contamination all the time. That might not be what everyone wants to hear, but I felt like I kind of had to give you my opinion on running them.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.